You know how some stories get better with a beer and a little firelight? This one needs both. Sit close. Wind's got teeth tonight. My name's Keanu Russell. I run freight between Denver and the coasts mostly, and I do fine by it. I've got a wife and a sister back in Boulder who tell me I'm too old to be sleeping on the ground and too stubborn to know it. They're right about both. I cook when I'm off on the road. Comfort stuff, cast iron chili, sourdough I babysit like an infant. Thick coffee you can stand the spoon in. It's a habit that came from cheap diners and long nights. You start making your own biscuits after the third plate of grey gravy and fatigue. So when my buddy Tom asked me to come down to the Ozarks for a long weekend hunt, real winter sun, blue sky cold, no bugs, no thunderheads, I said yes, mostly because he said I could run the camp kitchen. We were 5. Tom, a lineman out of Springfield, who knew every forest road between the White River and the Arkansas line. June, who once guided elk hunters in Colorado and moved back home to take care of her dad. Tiller, a quiet guy from Joplin who rebuilt antique guns for a living. And Dane, a paramedic with a laugh you could hear through a wall. I was the outsider, the trucker with a camp stove and the cooler full of meat. We planned for 3 nights. Winter, sunny days, brittle shadows, nights cold enough that the stars felt like shattered glass suspended over us. We set up near the Buffalo River, down in a gap where the trees swung their arms over a dry creek bed. Mark Twain National Forest on one side, Boston Mountains murmuring on the other, and the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own bones. The ground held frost under the leaves. If you knelt and brushed the top layer aside, your palm touched glass cold dirt. Our fire smoke hung thin as thread in the afternoon air. All the familiar comforts lined up. 2 tents like small brown houses, a blue tarp with a ridge pole, the Coleman stove, my iron skillet, my sourdough starter in a jar wrapped in a wool sock. Guns leaned against a pine like tired men. A 30-06, a 308, a 270, and Tiller's Pride, a lever-action 45-70, with the kind of bluing that made you afraid to breathe on it. Sidearm stayed on belts. We weren't idiots. It was Dane, stirring coffee with a stick, who said it first. Ever heard of the Ozark Howler? June rolled her eyes. Every uncle's ghost story. Tom chuckled. Guy at the feed store swears his cousin saw it near Jasper. Says it's got horns like a devil goat and eyes like brake lights. I told him brake lights don't exist in Jasper. I've heard it all, I said, and didn't add what I'd actually done on Tuesday night before I left. I went down the rabbit hole. On the road, late in a motel, the kind with carpet that smells like yesterday's shower. I'd searched sightings and reports, half for fun, half because I knew if we sat in the pines with a fire going, somebody would drag the howler out of the dark. There were stories going back over a century. A cat thing, big as a pony, thick shoulders, hair like matted smoke, a tail that did too much thinking. Sometimes horns, sometimes it was just the ears, always the eyes. It screamed or howled in a way that made elk bugles and wolf howls sound like practice versions. One rancher wrote about a sound like a violin string sawed across a metal bucket. Another describing laughing, not people laughing, laughing like something's car engine is missing a piston. I read about it cutting through camps, nosing through packs, letting the fire die and then stepping into the cold circle, like it owned the place. A few abductions too, depending on who you believed and how many beers they'd had. I dismissed those as tall tales then, because I wanted to sleep. The first day was easy. Winter sun that slicked the hills in a low, honey light. We spent the morning following tracks, deer mostly, one set of wild pig prints that we agreed to avoid. I prepped venison steaks from Tom's freezer, seared them hard, laid them over beans I'd cooked down with a handful of coffee grounds and brown sugar. The kind of meal that makes smoke live in your clothes. We ate and teased and threw sticks into the fire to see whose would pop loudest. It felt like a trip that would end the way it should. Tired shoulders, a full cooler, a long drive home with good memories. It was almost dark when we got the first sign, the one I didn't recognize as a sign. You know foxes? The way they make that flat, awful scream, like a woman yelling from far away. We heard something like that once, out beyond the creek where the trees knit together tight. It didn't carry like a fox. It didn't rise and fall like a coyote chorus either. It shot straight, one long bolt of noise that started low and then bent up as if it found something vertical inside itself. It made the hairs under my cap lift. Tom tilted his head like a dog that knows the word walk. June's hand went to the butt of her sidearm without her eyes leaving the trees. Tiller, who rarely volunteered, moved fast, set his cup down so slow he might as well have been timing a clock. "Cat," he said, but his voice didn't agree with him. Dane stared at the shadows. Cats don't pitch like that. "Cougar?" I asked, because the mind wants a box to put things in. "Maybe," June said, "but we don't get many cougars, and the ones we get don't audition for the opera." We built the fire higher than we needed. I draped the skillet over the coals like a shield. Night came on with that high country quickness. 1 second the open woods are blue, the next their zipper slit and your own breath's too loud. Later, after the coffee cooled, something moved around us the way a thought moves, unseen, a pressure. You could track it by the birds shutting up in a widening circle. We sat there pretending not to notice the way the quiet arrived in rings. When twigs snapped, they didn't snap in a line. They snapped, waited, snapped again from a different angle. It was circling, but not the way coyote circles. Opportunistic, testing. This was mine that had memorized our silhouettes. "Feel that?" Dane whispered. And I did. Like the woods thickened by a degree, like a cloud passed over the moon that wasn't there. I stood to stretch and knocked the cooler with my boot. The lid latched shut with a click. In that same second, like it had timed itself to the hinge, something exhaled behind me. Close. Too close. I turned to dead dark, and nothing. "Jesus," I said, because my body needed a word. Tom shone his headlamp in a slow fan. Snow from last week still crouched in the north, facing shade, thin as parchment. The beam washed a low cedar, a trunk scarred with old claw marks we joked about earlier. The air smelled like wet iron. The exhale came again, from the other side. It never fully showed that first night. That was the worst part. You didn't get to put your eyes on it, to decide size and shape and what you should do. It showed itself in fractions, a silhouette that didn't match any animal I knew. The shoulder too tall for a cat, the line of the back broken by something that caught the headlamp and threw it back, as a curved rim might. Horns, if you let your mind say the word. The eyes, when they blinked at us from the brush, took red the way taillights do in fog, but headlamp eyes do that with deer too. You keep telling yourself that. Deer. Just deer. It kept its distance, mostly, but it had a habit. It would let you forget it for a minute, let the conversation come back, and then it would step, deliberate, to the edge of the firelight in whichever place you weren't looking. It didn't want a charge, it wanted a jump. It wanted to know if it owned the timing in our heads. And I swear, twice it let the fire gutter low and then moved closer, as if measuring how brave the dark made it. It took little things that night, not food, not anything a scavenger would want. It took the red bandana I'd hung to dry on a bush. It pulled a glove from the fold of Dane's pack and left it 10 yards away in the exact pose of a dropped hand. It unlatched the tent flap on June's tent and lifted it 2 inches, then let it fall while she was looking dead at it, as if to show she couldn't stop it from touching anything it wanted. When the flames dipped low, the shadows stood up. "Tiller," June said low, "tell me this isn't some stunt of yours." Tiller didn't answer. His mouth had that hard line that means a man's using his teeth to hold in what he's feeling. He rotated the 45-70 in his hands and set it down again. None of us wanted to fire into trees at night. If it was a cat, a real one, if it was anything we could explain, we didn't want to be the idiots on the news. The howl came again around midnight, closer. The first second of it is what gets you. The scrape in it, the sound of something pushing its voice up a hill, and then the climb, all the way up into a pitch you don't know bones can make. I felt it strike the teeth in my jaw. It doesn't sound like fear, it sounds like opinion, like the woods telling you to get small. We slept in shivers, in shifts. I woke at 3 to Dane's whisper, "Hey, Keanu." The fire had gone down to a long V of coals. Our breath made the tent a halo. "You see where June is?" "In her tent?" "Then who's that?" Someone stood near the creek, back to us, head cocked. The shoulders were wrong, too bunched high. It was the wrong height too, like the top half of it was a size bigger than the bottom. The shoulders moved as if the neck wanted to find the sound and couldn't. The figure squatted, then unfolded with a hinge, movement I can only call unhuman. It was all silhouette and suggestion, but it put a dent in my ideas about what lived out here. The moonlight threw a pale bar across its head. The bar broke on 2 curved rises. You can call them horns or you can call them the branching of a low limb behind it. I've argued with myself 100 times, but they broke the light. And then it was gone, not like a deer or a man goes, not a run, but a decision. Like somebody's turned a page and the picture on it changed. We did the stupid human thing in the morning. We rationalized. We counted everything and laughed and shook our heads. "Coyote," Tom said. "Wind," June said. "Cougar," Tiller said. Then conceded cougars don't move flaps with their paws like they're checking the stitching. I made cornbread pancakes in a bacon fat and smothered them with syrup till our mouths remembered sweetness. The woods at noon looked like a joke the night told. A winter sun stood in the sky like an unblinking eye. If you've never felt its warmth in those hours, you don't know how fast your body will forgive a bad night. We followed a faint trail that afternoon, up along a limestone shelf where the trees leaned away from the drop. Deer tracks crisscrossed. We found 2 prints in a shaded patch of old snow that made us all stop. They weren't cat, they weren't dog. If you told me a goat had put them there with hooves that had decided, briefly, to be soft, I'd believe you. Heavier at the front, with a broadness that spoke of weight falling in the form of high shoulder. The stride was wrong, the distances uneven, like the thing had made them had a part of its body that moved faster than the rest. "You like boxes?" I ran out of boxes. "I don't like this," June said. "Let's call it a day hike," Tom said. "Be back before dusk." We were, with time to spare. The second encounter didn't care about that. I could smell the fire from 20 yards out. I always add coffee grounds to the last of the ember smoke to take the tang off. The habit came from a chef in Amarillo with a tattoo of a skeleton stirring a pot. That smoke should have been a comfort. Instead, the air tasted like it had been breathed already. The camp looked wrong as soon as the tarp came into view. Not destroyed, not ransacked, rearranged. Our chairs had been pushed inward by a foot, tightening the circle like we'd all scooted closer. The cooler had shifted sideways, and the tracks in the frost around it were a mess of scuffs and short drags. My skillet sat on the fire pit upside down, like a beached turtle, and the jar with my starter? The wool sock was off it. The lid sat on the ground beside it, like a carefully folded hat. The dough had been poked in 2 places by something that didn't mind heat and wanted to see what made bubbles. I ran my thumb through the dent and smelled it. Yeast and ash and a rank undernote, like fur that sat in smoke too long. "It's playing house," Dane said. "It's testing," June said. "See what we touch, see what we love." I didn't immediately notice what was missing because it didn't take gear. It took names. The Polaroid of my wife and my sister I kept tucked up in a mesh pocket inside my tent. Me on the front stoop in Boulder, flour on my shirt, my sister laughing so hard she blurred, was gone. The pocket zipper hung open like a mouth mid-sentence. In its place, in that empty mesh triangle, was a cedar twig, bent to a shape that meant nothing until you realized it was trying to mean something. A white V and 2 short hooks above it, as if a child had drawn a face with horns and left it in your underwear drawer. "Hey," Dane called and ran 3 steps forward and stopped. His pack lay open but not scattered. The map he'd folded carefully that morning had been unfolded and then folded the wrong way. The folding was the part that made him shake. "Where's Tom?" Tiller asked. He'd been right behind me when we reached the ridge above camp. He wasn't there now. We yelled his name and got nothing but a pair of crows lifting black from a sycamore. The quarter minute we gave it felt like a year. Then we did the thing you're supposed to do. Gaps, patterns, lines of movement. Go slow and don't break into panic, because panic takes you apart in pieces. Junes hit her hand on my chest when I almost bolted. "If it's a cat," she said, "it's watching. You don't run with a cat watching." Tom called back before we had to make a real plan. The voice came from the creek bed, downstream, not far, too near for how long he'd been gone. "Over here," he said, sounding like his mouth was full of snow. We found him sitting on a rock with his hands on his knees, like an obedient child, not hurt, not bleeding, but with the look a man has when he drives through black ice and keeps driving because no one told him he should have died. "I was coming in," he said, "and I smelled a dead thing. Not old, dead. That hot dead smell. I kept looking and then I was on the ground. I didn't fall, I was just down. Something pushed with a hand that wasn't a hand. I couldn't get breath, like a kid sat on my chest. And then I was sitting here." We all talked at once. Questions fall out of people when they meet a hole they can't look into. He raised a palm and I shut up because his hand wobbled in the cold, and it made me feel protective in a way I didn't have language for. "Don't chase it," he said. "That's what it wanted." "What did you see?" I asked. He moved his jaw like he was tasting a flavor he couldn't name. "A tail thinking," he said. "A back that didn't agree with itself. Eyes that were red because they wanted to be red, not because of your light. And, this is going to sound wrong, it laughed. Not like it was happy, like it was correcting me. I've heard bobcats, I've heard hogs, I've heard men. This was a correction. We stayed close after that. The sun had a way of slipping away early in those Howlers. I cooked fast like cooking was a spell. Fats and flour and heat and salt. Alchemy I understood. I made a skillet of potatoes with a brilliance of bacon. I poured coffee until the pot seemed empty. Something out there breathed our recipes and decided which of us it liked best. Maybe we'll leave tomorrow, I said, and no one told me I was soft. Night 2 came in on a quiet step. The sky turned the cleanest black I've ever seen. You could touch Orion. The kind of night that makes you think about men 100 years back, huddled with stories and names for things that hadn't been invented, to hate them yet. We built a fire tall. We stacked extra wood within arm's reach. We set one chair empty and didn't say why. Maybe for luck, maybe to tell whatever was outside that there was a seat for it, and it didn't need to make one of us get up. We heard a laugh around 10. Laughter is too warm a word. Start with a cough, flinch it. Pull a string taut across it and bow it wrong. That's the sound. It came from the left, then the right, then behind me in a way that made my back a screen for my brain to project fear on. The fire hissed low as a coal collapsed. I reached for a log and my hand stopped mid-air. Because it wasn't a laugh that doused the fire. It was wind, you'll say. It was draft. But the wind had been steady all night. A slow creep down the hollow. And this was a breath. One long breath from the dark that made the flames tilt so hard they kissed the rocks, drew in, and then fell. You ever hear a fire go quiet? It's not silence, it's absence. It's someone standing up and walking out of a busy room. A thing that means life withdrawing that meaning. Don't move, June said. She spoke to the fire like it could hear it. The dark rushed in so fast it gave me vertigo. Your eyes are stupid at first. They keep looking for light where there isn't any. We lifted headlamps and didn't turn them on because we had this insane idea that we shouldn't show where our faces were. Something stepped into the circle where the light had been. I can tell you I saw it then, the way you want me to say it. I can tell you it was 7 feet tall, or 6 or 5.5 on a raise. I can tell you its hair was black, that red-gray in the fire, scars on the rocks. I can say horns and mean anything from deer nubs to curved goat crescents. I can tell you it stank like a kennel left in rain and that its eyes were red, that made red its job. I could tell you all that and be both truthful and lying, because what I saw was the idea of it, filling every space with left open. That's the worst part. It uses your mind as a lens. You see what you fear, and it will be truer than a footprint. It moved past me, the empty chair. It did not sit, but it made the chair acknowledge it. The way a field acknowledges wind. I felt heat on my cheek and realized my face was turned too close to it, as if a stove had rolled up beside me, as if my head knew to give it that respectful angle we give the dangerous. June's hand found mine in the dark and squeezed once, like you do to a kid in a crowd. I squeezed back. Then it turned, like we were pages in a book, and it had finished the first and wanted to see if the second was better. It moved toward Dane. We didn't breathe. It moved toward Tiller. The 4570 lay in his lap, like a small decision that needed a vote. It moved toward Tom, and I reached then. I couldn't help it. I reached, and my hand touched air that was thick as horse breath. My fingers tingled like they'd pressed through a bad memory. And just like that, the way you wake up a half second before your alarm. The fire signed and lifted a little tongue of light by itself. The flame crawled up a rib of wood. The circle made itself again. The thing stood where the shadow had been. But when light came back, it was the shadow. "Hey," it said. "That's not true. Not the way you're hearing it." It didn't speak in English. It spoke in the arrangement of its breathing and the way the trees answered, and the sound we all made when we remembered our bodies. But I knew that's what it meant in my head. Hey, not a greeting, a correction. The way you'd say hey to a dog who's thinking about jumping a fence. The way you'd remind something of its place. We didn't run. It's not a hero story. We stayed. That's the strangest part. The fire came back as if a check had been cashed. Wood became flame, like the deal had been struck. A little warmed and we sat still. The thing turned or resolved itself back into the trees, and if you're angry at me for not firing a shot into the dark, all I can say is, your hand wasn't the one that had to move. None of us opened that circle with a bullet. Maybe that was wrong. Maybe that was the only right thing we did all weekend. You want the kidnapping? It's the part nobody believes when the rest of it slides down like bad whiskey. Fine, here. We lost Tiller. Not for long, maybe an hour, maybe two. Time is a liar in the dark. 1 minute he was beside me, the weight of him a comfort in the chair's creak. The next, there was a hole where his shape has been. No sound, not a shuffle or a grunt, just absence, like the fire going out again. You know when someone walks out of a room and leaves their warmth in the cushion? It was like that. We didn't shout, not at first. We listened. The laugh came from downhill and to the right, and then uphill and to the left, as if it wanted to be a compass. We stood as one body, all four of us turning together. The choreography of people trying to decide where to be fear. June took the lead. She always did. She drew her sidearm and pointed it down at her other hand. Did that slicing motion that means you stay here. We broke our own rule of not running. We ran downhill, 3 lights off and 1 on low. Me at the edge of the beam because some stupid part of me wanted to shield it with my body, like that would keep the night from seeing it. The creek bed was a strip of frost that glowed under the headlamp. Our breath smoked and hung, and then moved backward, sucked toward the trees, chasing something we couldn't see. "Till!" Dane hissed, and then louder, because his chest wouldn't accept the whisper. "Tiller!" The answer came like someone speaking through a coat. "Here!" He wasn't in a trap. He wasn't in a hole. He was sitting upright again in a patch of leaves, ankles together like he'd been told to be neat. His mouth had blood on it where he'd bit his lip, but otherwise he looked like he'd sat down to wait on a porch. His eyes were wet and happy and furious. "I went with it," he said. "You what?" June asked. It wanted me to see how small I was, so I went. I stood up and followed it like a kid behind a parade. It showed me where we sit when we forget we are the guests here. He barked a laugh that hurt my heart. I sound like church. "What did you see?" I asked. He swallowed. A place where the ground gets thin and you can hear what's under it, bones or water, both. I saw where it lays, things out to get cold. I saw a shape like a deer without a neck and a space between something used to be. It touched my shirt with a hand that wasn't a hand, and then it told me to wait. "With words?" Dane asked, near tears. with everything that isn't words. Did it hurt you? He showed us his sleeve, 4 rows of dust, as if someone, and I cannot write this without my gut going a slow twist, had pressed the pads of its fingers into him and left the imprint of old road. Not claws, not teeth, touch. We got him back to camp without speaking. You have to learn when your mouth is a liability. The fire was fine when we returned. The chairs were where we'd left them. My sourdough had split the skin of itself in a steady rise, even with the lid off and the cold laid on it. And perched on the log we used for a table, in the exact center of our world, was the Polaroid of me and my girls. I stared at it until the white border went gray. And the cedar twig, remember? The smile with horns? Someone had unfolded it and laid it straight like a bending stick again. Hey, it said. Correction. We left at first light, and I will admit to you, I didn't want to be the last to step out of that circle. I wanted to be the third, I wanted to be the second, but I was the last because I was the one who owned the skillet, and because some primitive justice in me demanded I not run from my own damn pan. The walk to the truck was too easy. No branches fell in our path. No shadows jerked like puppets. The trees swayed a little and let us through like we'd paid the toll. At the ridge where you can look back and see the smallest of your camp, I turned. The tarp flashed blue as if to wink, and that was the only movement. Back on the 2-lane, warming hands over the vents, we didn't speak for 5 miles. I drove south, then west, then north back to Boulder 3 days later. The interstate, a ribbon I've worn deep with miles. I passed through a town that claimed a Howler on its welcome sign, and I wanted to laugh, and I wanted to pull over and leave an offering of bread. I didn't do either. You wanted mystery, not blood. You wanted rummaging and doused fires, and the kind of fear that doesn't need a coroner. That's what we got. Nobody died. That seems like mercy, until you sit with the other possibilities. Nobody died because it didn't have to kill us to own the night. It corrected us. It put our chairs in a better shape and made sure we knew which of our things were just things and which were names. It took a man and gave him back, not to be kind but to show that it could do either. I went home and cooked for the people I love. My wife watched me knead dough like I was trying to teach it a new language. My sister asked why my hands shook when the mixer beat eggs. I told them the woods make you humble and left it at that, because you can't explain that a laugh is a sentence. A week later, in a motel outside Cheyenne, the heater clicking like a grasshopper, I opened my phone and read more. Old clippings, new posts, a ranger in the 1980s who's heard a cry like a prairie burned in one line. A farmer who found a goat with its tail tied in knots you only see in sailor books. A woman in a church basement near Mountain View who swore something with a back like a mountain dragged her laundry off the line and folded it near the creek. A boy in 1909 with a drawing of a cat with horns that looked exactly like a cedar twig bent wrong. I know what I saw. I also know that what I saw could be the way it wanted me to see it. The last night we were there, when the fire went out, I heard it step into the space and I felt, for one perfect second, that I knew it and that it knew me. Not like a friend, not like an enemy either, like a landlord with a soft knuckle on a door. Hey, it said. Correction. I think of that sometimes when I'm alone on a Wyoming shoulder and the stars are stupid and beautiful, when I pour coffee into the wind and the steam gets taken before I can smell it. I think about how we pretend we're in charge when the only thing that ever made us safer was making the circle wider, moving the chairs inward, leaving one seat empty. I carry a cedar twig in my glove box now. Sometimes I bend it wrong, then straighten it again. It means nothing. It means everything. It's a habit like prayer. If you ever go down there in winter, when the sun looks honest and the shade looks like a promise, remember this: build your fire right. Feed it when it sags. Keep your hands off your gun unless your hand moves without you telling it to. And if something laughs from the dark like it's correcting your posture, all I can tell you is to listen. It might be telling you exactly where you are on the map. We weren't the first to be moved around like chairs. We won't be the last. The Ozark Howler doesn't need your belief. It runs a route older than the Forest Service roads and knows where the ground gets thin. It's out there whether you give it a name or not. It's patient. It arranges, it keeps count. It is not hunting you, it's reminding you who hunts whom. Sometimes, late when I'm parked under sodium lights and the wind finds space between the cab and the sleeper, I'll hear a sound that starts low and climbs and then breaks into a laugh that isn't a laugh. I don't look to the window. I pour coffee into my cup, watch the steam lift and say, as soft as a man can, "Hey." And then, because my girls taught me to set an extra plate even when we don't have guests, I slide a biscuit onto a napkin by the passenger seat and leave the chair beside me empty.